When Don was flying and he had the engine failure and the part broke in the Merlin engine, Don was about a half a mile away from the airport, and he was about 1,500 feet, maybe 1,200 feet. He turned immediately toward the airport, and between his position and the airport, we had a Christmas tree farm. Of course, had he been higher, if the weather were better or closer, he would have made it onto airport property. But he came through a series of very large evergreens, which broke the wing off, broke the propeller off, basically destroyed the aircraft, and Don never woke up after this accident. Now, that being said, we were all devastated, of course, at the accident site. But after a few hours of talking to some of our friends, we had a gentleman named Jerry Beck who had built our fuselage. And Jerry Beck said, Brad, and to the rest of us from the Red Tail Project, it is possible to rebuild the aircraft. They'll have to start from scratch. Once again, going out on the road to fundraise. But we will make sure that if we save the pieces and we do some bartering and go out and purchase some of the pieces, brand new, we will have another aircraft at some point in time. We did not think it was possible, but in 5 years' time, we raised the funds, and between bartering for new parts and sharing stories and raising funds, we were able to get all the parts to reassemble this aircraft. Now, Jerry Beck's Tri-State Aviation, which is based in actually it's in Wappington, North Dakota, is basically like a very large model airplane factory. And the airplane is assembled like a model airplane, if you will. What you're seeing here is our spare engine. The engines are very, very expensive, and it's helpful to have spare parts for these World War II aircraft because they're not always accessible. So this is our number 2 engine. The person in the blue shirt is Don Rosendahl, our outgoing project leader. And the yellow cap is our crew chief, or our lead mechanic, John Bale. Another interesting point to note is that as a volunteer, everyone lives outside of North Dakota. So for the past 5 years, they spent 4 hours on their own time traveling up on a Friday, and they all have families, coming back on a Sunday, not being paid to restore this aircraft. It was just that important to telling the story of the Tuskegee Airmen and also fulfilling Don's dream of making sure the public knows about the Tuskegee Airmen and how they have contributed to American history. This was another shot of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. Most of the aircraft are flying with Rolls-Royce Merlins. There is a P-51A model that featured the Allison engine, which wasn't very useful at high altitudes. And you will see occasionally an A model out there flying, but for the most part, Mustangs have Merlin engines, which gave for more performance at high altitudes. It had a 2-stage, 2-speed compressor, supercharger. There's another gentleman that you will see later on, Bob Odegaard. Now, Bob Odegaard is another Warbird restoration gentleman who lives in North Dakota. He assembled our wings initially. And for the second time around, he still had the wing jig, and we were able to use very little of the old wing with new pieces to have a new structure. Remember, you have spars and ribs just like in a model aircraft. So Bob assembled the wing at his factory or restoration facility, and Jerry Beck in Wappington assembled the fuselage. Jerry was smart enough to keep the jig from the original C model because he thought after a while people would be tired of Ds, and with other C models there might be more demand, and he was correct. Now there are about 7 C models with the Razorback flying. So Jerry did the fuselage and Bob did the wing. At some point you have to mate them together. Also in this picture, when I talk about bolts and we have the nylon bolts on these aircraft models, usually you have the 2 dowels in the front and you have the nylon bolts in the back. The Mustang has 4 very large bolts and nuts holding that fuselage to the wing. And when you're flying at 300 and some miles per hour, sometimes those bolts come in and you think, I hope they used enough Loctite on them so it doesn't come apart. But that being said, There's a lot of other interlinkage that goes together with assembling the fuselage. Here we are dropping the fuselage onto the C model wing, which is slightly different than the D model wing. The C model also has 4 machine guns, whereas the Ds had 6 machine guns. You also see on the left, underneath the stars and bars, the radiator. Now this is a liquid-cooled aircraft as opposed to a Bearcat or a T6 that is radio engine. A friend of mine from Torrance who used to fly P-47s had the jugs or cylinders shot out several times, and he made it back to his home base without any oil pressure. And he said the little P-51 wouldn't have held up to the ground fire that he endured in the P-47 Thunderbolt. Again, from the left, we see the fuselage being lowered, and you have a big crane, and you just move very, very slowly, trying to line up the bolts with the nuts. This is the shot from the left showing you the gap for the flaps that actually come down about 50 degrees on the aircraft. On this wonderful day at Tri-State Aviation, we actually rolled the airplane out after we took 3 or 4 hours to put it together, and this is the first shot of the airplane being on its gear after the crash. This gentleman is Joe Gomer from Duluth. He's a Tuskegee Airman, and Joe was present for the mating of the fuselage and the wing, and he's a part of our board and has been involved with the Red Tail Project along with Lee Archer when he was alive and Colonel McKee for quite some time, over 10 years. This is a group of volunteers, Jerry Beck, his wife, some of the mechanics who are volunteers, and also some of the personnel from Tri-State Aviation. As a result of the crash, Jerry Beck wanted to make sure that this did not happen again, and this is what we call a chip detector. A chip detector actually detects pieces of metal in the oil, and when they detect, or the detector picks up the chips of metal, it turns on a light in the cockpit. When you see that light, you land. And as a part or result of this, Jerry Beck named this the Heinz chip detector, and you can see Don Heinz's name on the chip detector.